When Darnell entered the upscale boutique, quiet smirks and amused glances followed him. He moved with calmness, inspecting each price tag while the staff and customers observed with barely concealed skepticism, unaware of his true intentions. By the time he was done, they would all be left speechless. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe now for compelling stories, unexpected turns, and inspiration in every video. A warm afternoon sun streamed through the glass walls of the boutique, casting a gentle glow over polished shelves filled with luxury handbags, elegant jackets, and sparkling accessories. The atmosphere was tranquil, a kind of stillness that accompanied exclusivity and wealth, only disrupted by the faint rustling of tags and soft footsteps on marble floors. Darnell walked in, his head held high and his pace deliberate as he took in the surroundings. Dressed in simple, well-fitted attire, he appeared to belong, yet he still attracted attention. Heads turned, eyes lingered, and a subtle tension rose in the air. Darnell moved from one display to another, occasionally reaching out to feel a finely stitched sleeve or a polished leather surface. He regarded the price tags with steady eyes, betraying no surprise or hesitation, but it was evident from the way some customers scrutinized him, eyes narrowing and lips tightening, that they believed he didn't quite fit in here. He could almost sense the weight of their judgment, silent and sharp. It was nothing new, yet it always struck a chord deep within. As he examined the items, a store clerk approached him, her steps quick, her smile polite but tinged with something less than friendly. "Is there something specific you're looking for, sir?" she inquired, her tone suggesting he wasn't there to make a genuine purchase. Darnell turned to her, his expression unreadable, and simply shook his head, saying, "Just browsing, thank you." She lingered a moment longer, as if expecting him to say more, perhaps an apology for taking up her time. When he didn't, she offered a small, tight smile and turned away, but not without casting him one last skeptical glance. Darnell continued to browse, aware that her gaze hadn't completely left him. Nearby, another customer, a man in a sharply pressed suit, leaned toward his companion, murmuring something that ended in a quiet laugh. Darnell caught the words, "window shopping," followed by a stifled chuckle, but he kept moving, now even slower, as if savoring every moment spent in the store. With each price tag he glanced at, he seemed to be calculating something, a quiet determination building in his eyes that no one else could quite grasp. The sneers and whispers floated around him like distant echoes, only fueling his growing resolve. Darnell continued his quiet exploration of the store, moving gracefully from one display to another, unfazed by the whispers and glances surrounding him. He paused in front of a row of sleek leather jackets, his fingers brushing the fabric as he checked the tag without a hint of hesitation. The clerk from earlier noticed his lingering at the high-end section and returned, her expression caught between politeness and impatience. "These items," she began carefully, her tone measured as if speaking to a child, "are part of our exclusive collection. They can be quite an investment." She tilted her head slightly, waiting for him to inquire about prices or perhaps to back away and find a section more appropriate for him. Darnell simply nodded, his face calm, though a spark of amusement danced briefly in his eyes. "Thank you," he replied simply, his voice steady and polite. He didn't elaborate or explain himself. He allowed the silence to linger, holding her gaze for a moment before moving on to the next display. The clerk stood there, blinking, clearly thrown off by his calm confidence, her smile faltering. She looked around, as if seeking support from her colleagues, who were also observing with thinly veiled curiosity. As Darnell walked past the accessories, another customer nearby looked at him and muttered a bit louder than necessary, "Bet he's just curious about the prices. Can't even afford one of these." His companion chuckled softly, sharing a look that conveyed a silent agreement about who he was and why he was there. Darnell glanced their way briefly, catching their sneers, but maintained a neutral expression, even though he felt the familiar sting of being judged, sized up, dismissed. As if he were invisible, his worth assumed to be less than the tags he was examining. Yet rather than turn back or leave, he made a decision. His movements became purposeful, as he approached a rack of scarves, picking one up, folding it neatly, and carrying it with him. He continued to another shelf, selecting a small leather wallet, then to the perfume counter, where he examined a bottle carefully before setting it aside. Item by item, he seemed to be gathering a collection, an unspoken plan starting to take shape. Yet he maintained his composure, moving with a quiet dignity that made him appear unfazed by the stares and whispers. As his small pile grew, the same clerk approached him once more, clearly puzzled. She hesitated, watching him closely, as if trying to determine whether he was serious or merely wasting her time. But Darnell provided no explanation, no reason for his choices. Instead, he moved on, taking his time with each item he selected, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. As Darnell continued gathering items, a shift in the air seemed to follow him. His quiet confidence and focused movements began to attract even more attention. The whispers grew louder, with some of the store's more skeptical customers now openly exchanging incredulous looks. A young man in a designer suit leaned against a counter, watching Darnell with a smirk, his eyes darting between the items Darnell carried and the prices clearly displayed on each tag. At the counter, a second clerk, older and with a no-nonsense demeanor, observed Darnell's progress with crossed arms. She nudged the first clerk, speaking just low enough that she thought he wouldn't hear. "I don't know what he thinks he's doing," she muttered, glancing pointedly at the leather wallet Darnell held, a high-end item most people would think twice about purchasing. "No way he's serious. He'll probably put it all back when he sees the total." The first clerk nodded, a slight look of discomfort crossing her face as she glanced back at Darnell. She seemed unsure, caught between the usual professionalism her job required and the suspicion that had been slowly creeping in as Darnell continued to add items to his collection. Fully aware of the staff's eyes on him, Darnell made his way to the cashier's desk, his small pile of carefully chosen items in hand. He placed them on the counter with a steady, deliberate motion, meeting the first clerk's gaze. Her polite smile had returned, though it wavered slightly, as if she were unsure whether to treat him like a serious customer or brace for an awkward scene. Without a word, Darnell glanced down at the items on the counter, then back at the clerk, who seemed to be waiting for him to change his mind or ask about a discount. Instead, Darnell said in a calm voice, "Actually, I'd like one of everything in this line." The clerk's eyes widened slightly, clearly taken aback. She hesitated, looking over the items as if she hadn't heard him correctly. "Excuse me, sir. Did you say everything in this line?" Darnell gave a small nod, his expression calm, almost amused by her surprise. "Yes," he said, adding, "I'd like to make a full purchase of each item." The room fell silent. Even the murmuring customers paused, openly watching as they tried to process what they had just heard. Darnell's expression remained unchanged as he watched the clerk reach for the phone, likely to call the manager to confirm such an unusual request. The clerk was visibly flustered, her confidence momentarily shaken as she struggled to maintain her polite smile. Behind him, onlookers exchanged shocked glances, their laughter fading as a ripple of disbelief swept through the room. Darnell simply stood there, his eyes calm and patient, waiting as the clerk nervously began processing his request, her fingers trembling slightly over the register as the realization of his request sank in. A ripple of quiet but palpable tension spread throughout the store. The manager, a neatly dressed middle-aged man with a watch that gleamed under the store's lighting, appeared from the back. He approached the counter with a practiced smile, though his expression betrayed a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Stepping up beside the clerk, he addressed Darnell directly. "Good afternoon, sir," he said with a polite nod. "I understand you'd like to purchase one of every item in this line." His voice was calm and professional, but with a slight edge, as though he were testing Darnell's commitment to his own words. Darnell met the manager's gaze, his expression still composed. "That's correct," he replied simply. He took a slight step back to let the clerk and the manager examine the items more closely. The manager gave a quick, almost dismissive glance at the assortment of scarves, wallets, jackets, and accessories Darnell had already set on the counter. He seemed to calculate the cost in his head, and the numbers were clearly high enough to make him pause. "I'll get the items brought out for you, sir," the manager said after a beat, trying to mask his surprise. He signaled to the clerk, who nodded and disappeared to gather the additional items. The manager remained, watching Darnell with a mixture of curiosity and reservation, still unsure of the man standing before him. Darnell's calm gaze met his, unwavering, as if he had made this decision long ago, and nothing about the reactions around him could change his mind. The other customers had grown nearly silent by this point, a few lingering in the background, their expressions a blend of confusion and interest. The man in the designer suit, who had smirked earlier, now looked between Darnell and the manager with a raised brow, Unable to hide his shock, another customer whispered to her friend, trying to guess the cost of Darnell's haul, the numbers swirling in their minds like something surreal. The clerk returned shortly with additional items, stacking them carefully on the counter as she avoided Darnell's eyes, her hands moving quickly, her face flushed as she realized the weight of what he was about to purchase. The pile grew steadily, a symbol of opulence and value in the form of neatly folded scarves, gleaming leather wallets, and finely stitched jackets. Darnell watched in silence, allowing the store staff to do their work, a faint but unshakable smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The silence in the store deepened, every eye focused on him as the clerk scanned each item, the total rising higher and higher on the screen. The beeping of the scanner filled the room, punctuating the tension with each beep. The spectators seemed to grow more restless, a mix of anticipation and disbelief passing between them. Finally, the clerk paused, turning the screen toward Darnell. The total glowed brightly, an amount most would balk at, a figure that seemed almost absurd for a single shopping trip. The manager cleared his throat, glancing at Darnell as though waiting for him to change his mind. "Are you sure about this, sir?" he asked, his voice low but filled with unmistakable doubt. It was clear he didn't expect Darnell to follow through. Darnell simply nodded, pulling out his wallet with steady hands. He retrieved his credit card, holding it out to the clerk without a flicker of hesitation. The manager and clerk exchanged glances, momentarily at a loss. With a slight tremor in her hand, the clerk took the card, swiping it through the register. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the transaction processed, the seconds ticking by like hours. Finally, the screen flashed, "Approved," and a soft chime confirmed the payment. A collective hush fell over the store. Darnell took his card back, tucking it calmly into his wallet, as if he hadn't just spent a small fortune. The manager quickly regained his composure, offering a subdued but respectful nod. "Thank you for your business, sir," he said, his voice a touch more respectful, his previous doubts fading into something close to awe. With his purchase complete, Darnell turned his attention to the growing pile of bags on the counter, neatly packed and ready. But rather than gathering them to leave, he took a slow, deliberate step back, scanning the room, his gaze settling on the curious onlookers, the store staff, and finally the manager. The entire store watched him in rapt silence, the shock of what had just happened still fresh on their faces. Darnell's calm, unwavering expression took in each face, his presence commanding a quiet authority. Breaking the silence, Darnell looked to the manager. "Actually, I'd like these delivered," he said, his voice steady but now carrying a hint of warmth, a gentleness that seemed to throw everyone off once again. "To the address I'll provide." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small card with an address on it, and handed it to the manager. The manager accepted the card, reading it with a slight furrow of his brow. His confusion grew as he realized the address wasn't to a private residence or an upscale neighborhood, but rather to a well-known community center in a modest part of the city. He glanced back up at Darnell, the question clear in his eyes, though he hesitated to ask directly. Darnell spared him the trouble. "I'd like everything to go there," he explained, his voice gentle but resolute. "These items aren't for me. They're for the people who truly appreciate them. It's a donation." The shock on the manager's face mirrored that of everyone else in the room. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they processed this new twist, disbelief mingling with a hint of admiration. The man in the designer suit, who had so confidently dismissed Darnell, looked stunned, his mouth opening slightly as he struggled to absorb what he had just witnessed. The first clerk, who had earlier shown him only skepticism, stood frozen, her expression softening into something resembling regret. She swallowed, casting her eyes down, clearly grappling with her own assumptions. Every person in the room seemed to shift slightly, uncomfortable with the knowledge that they had misjudged him, caught off guard by the generosity of his gesture. Darnell didn't linger on their reactions. He simply thanked the manager, gave a polite nod to the clerk, and turned to leave, his steps steady and dignified. He moved toward the exit with the same quiet confidence he had walked in with, his presence leaving a powerful impression in his wake. As he reached the door, he paused, glancing back one last time, a slight but unmistakable smile on his face as he took in the humbled faces of those who had doubted him. With that, he stepped out of the store, the door closing softly behind him, leaving everyone inside in stunned silence, their judgments overturned and their assumptions shattered. The echoes of his act lingered long after he was gone, a reminder of the quiet strength and grace with which he had navigated their prejudice and left a mark they wouldn't soon forget. Outside the boutique, Darnell paused for a moment, feeling the cool breeze brush against his face. He took a deep breath, a calmness settling over him as he gazed down the busy street. The weight of what had just transpired was still fresh in his mind, but it didn't linger heavily. Instead, he felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of purpose fulfilled. The world around him carried on as usual, people moving to and fro, oblivious to the moment that had just unfolded in the store behind him. As he walked away, he pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. After a few rings, a warm, friendly voice answered on the other end. It was Miss Grace, the director of the community center. "Darnell," she greeted him, surprise and joy evident in her tone. "I wasn't expecting your call. How are things?" Darnell smiled, picturing the community center he'd visited so many times, a place that had become like a second home to him over the years. It was where he had volunteered countless hours, organizing events, tutoring kids, and simply being there for people who needed a helping hand. He knew Miss Grace would understand the importance of his donation and the impact it would have on those who came through the center's doors every day. "I've got a bit of a surprise coming your way," Darnell said, his voice carrying a playful tone. He could almost picture Miss Grace raising her eyebrows, intrigued by his mysterious words. "Oh, should I be worried?" she chuckled, the warmth of her laughter filling his ear. "Not at all," he replied. "Just make sure there's enough room. A delivery is on its way, and it's a little more than usual." The line went silent for a moment as Miss Grace processed his words, curiosity clearly piqued. "Now you're really keeping me on my toes, Darnell, but whatever it is, I know it'll be wonderful." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her tone softened with gratitude. "You're always doing so much for us. Thank you, truly. You have no idea what it means." Darnell's heart swelled as he listened, reminded of the true purpose behind his actions. Years. He had seen the struggles of people in his community, the resilience of single parents, the perseverance of young people reaching for something better. Knowing he could bring a moment of joy or offer something valuable was enough for him. They deserved the very best, and he wanted them to experience the same pride and dignity that had been so often denied to them. "It's the least I can do," he replied softly, his voice filled with sincerity. They exchanged a few more words, and after saying goodbye, Darnell pocketed his phone, his steps feeling lighter. He walked away from the boutique, his mind already envisioning the smiles and gratitude that awaited him at the community center. Back at the boutique, the staff worked in hushed silence, preparing the large delivery Darnell had requested. The shock of his act still hung thick in the air, filling the store with an odd stillness, as if everyone were still piecing together what had just taken place. The manager oversaw the packing himself, carefully ensuring each item was wrapped and placed in sturdy bags for transport. He moved with an unusual focus, as if the act of packing each item had taken on a greater significance after Darnell's departure. The two clerks, who had earlier watched Darnell with skepticism, now worked side by side, their earlier dismissiveness replaced by a sense of reverence. The younger clerk, who had first approached him with doubt, handled each item with careful hands, her expression a mix of regret and awe. She hadn't expected Darnell to be more than a curious passerby, and the weight of her earlier assumptions pressed heavily on her mind. The older clerk, who had murmured dismissive comments before, finally broke the silence, glancing over at her colleague. "I didn't think he was serious," she admitted softly, her face flushed. She looked down at her hands, realizing how quick she had been to judge, and how little she had understood about the man who had just changed her perspective in a single afternoon. "I didn't think someone would do something like that." The younger clerk nodded, still visibly shaken. "He could have just bought it all and taken it home," she replied, almost to herself. "But he didn't. He wanted to give it away." Her voice held a note of wonder, as if she were still coming to terms with the kindness she'd witnessed. A kindness so unexpected that it had left her almost speechless. The manager overheard them, pausing briefly as he packed a jacket. "I think," he said, his voice low but thoughtful, "we all made assumptions about him that were unfair." He looked up, catching the eyes of his staff. There was no reprimand in his tone, only a quiet acknowledgement that they had all been wrong in their judgments. "Today's a reminder for us," he continued, "that we don't always know the people who walk through these doors. And maybe it's time we started looking a little deeper." The two clerks nodded, Feeling the weight of his words settle over them, they knew now that this was more than a simple sale, more than just a customer transaction. Darnell's actions had left an imprint on each of them, a quiet but undeniable reminder of their own biases and how easily they had dismissed someone based solely on appearances. As they finished packing the last of the items, a delivery driver arrived, glancing around as he waited for the load. The manager greeted him. His usual formal tone softened as he carefully explained the importance of the delivery, ensuring that every item would arrive intact. It was as if Darnell's generosity had touched even the way they handled their work, inspiring a respect and care they hadn't felt before. The manager took a final glance at the carefully wrapped items, feeling a profound sense of responsibility. He hoped that through this delivery, Darnell's kindness would reach each person at the community center and leave an impression just as powerful as it had in the store. The delivery truck rumbled along the streets, passing rows of small shops, modest houses, and community parks where kids played on rusted swings and slides. Inside the truck, the neatly packed luxury items swayed gently, each one carefully wrapped and stacked, symbols of a world far different from the neighborhoods they now traveled through. The driver glanced at the address on his clipboard, a little surprised by the destination. He was used to delivering to high-rise apartments, sprawling suburban homes, and offices downtown, not a community center in a quieter, less glamorous part of the city. When the truck finally pulled up outside the center, it attracted the attention of people passing by and a few teenagers lounging on the steps. They looked at the logo on the truck, eyebrows raised, as if unable to believe that such a vehicle would come to a place like this. One of the boys squinted, nudging his friend. "Think they're lost?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. But the delivery driver was already opening the back of the truck, revealing an impressive pile of bags bearing the boutique's elegant logo. Inside the community center, Miss Grace heard the noise and stepped out, curious about the commotion. When she saw the delivery, her eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and joy spreading across her face. She walked up to the driver, who was already beginning to unload the bags onto the sidewalk. "Excuse me," she said, a smile breaking through her initial surprise. "Is this all for us?" The driver nodded, checking the clipboard one more time to confirm. "Years." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Delivery from Mr. Darnell. It's for the center and the community." Miss Grace's expression softened, her eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and amazement. She knew Darnell was generous, but this was beyond what she had ever imagined. As the driver continued unloading, a small crowd began to gather, watching the bags pile up. Parents with young children, teenagers, and a few elders. Residents all drawn to the sight of the unexpected luxury now filling their familiar streets. The bags bore the unmistakable emblem of the boutique, a brand they had seen only in magazines or on television. A murmur spread through the crowd as people began to realize what was inside those bags, and Miss Grace could hear snippets of their astonished whispers. "Is this real?" an elderly woman asked, clutching her shopping bag tightly as she stared at the pile. "I've never even been near one of these stores." A young girl, no older than 10, tugged on her mother's sleeve, her eyes wide with wonder. "Mom, do you think there's something in there for me?" she whispered, as if afraid to hope too much. Miss Grace turned to the crowd, her heart full, and clapped her hands for attention. She raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear, her warm tone carrying an energy that resonated with every person gathered. "Friends, this is a gift from our very own Darnell," she announced, her voice filled with pride. "He wanted each of you to have something special, something you can wear or use with pride." As she spoke, the crowd fell silent, absorbing her words. The name Darnell was familiar to almost everyone there. He wasn't a stranger, but a part of their lives. Someone who had grown up in their community, who had given his time, his energy, and now something so generous and unexpected. The knowledge that this gift had come from one of their own made it even more meaningful. A gesture that carried not just value, but respect and love. With Miss Grace's encouragement, the crowd began to approach the bags, their initial hesitation melting into excitement and gratitude. Carefully, she and a few volunteers started handing out the items, calling people forward one by one. Each person received something unique: a scarf, a jacket, a wallet, and an accessory. Each item handled with the kind of care and reverence that came from understanding its worth, not in money, but in sentiment. One by one, they accepted their gifts, their faces lighting up as they touched the high-quality fabric, smelled the rich leather, or admired the craftsmanship of each piece. A teenage girl held up a leather jacket, her fingers tracing the stitching as she looked at it in awe. "I've never had anything this nice," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Her friends gathered around, each admiring their own items, their faces beaming with joy and pride. A mother held a scarf up to her daughter, draping it gently over her shoulders as the girl looked up, smiling shyly. The delivery became an event in itself, a celebration of generosity and community spirit. Laughter and murmurs of gratitude filled the air as people continued to receive their items. The scene transformed the modest street outside the center into something almost magical. Darnell's gesture had reached far beyond the simple act of giving. It had created a shared experience, a moment of connection and joy that resonated deeply with everyone present. As the distribution continued, word spread quickly, and more people gathered, each eager to see what was happening at the community center. Even those who didn't receive an item shared in the joy, watching their neighbors, friends, and loved ones experience a rare moment of luxury. It was more than just a gift. It was an affirmation, a reminder that they too were deserving of something beautiful, something special, something that carried a sense of pride and dignity. The boutique bags, with their elegant branding, became symbols of possibility and respect, tangible evidence that they were seen and valued. Miss Grace moved among the crowd, handing out the items with the help of volunteers, her face glowing with happiness. Every so often, she would catch someone's eye, and in those shared glances, a silent understanding passed between them. Gratitude not only for the gift, but for what it represented that day. The children especially delighted in the small accessories and scarves, laughing as they draped themselves in items they had only ever dreamed of owning. Parents watched with quiet smiles, their own hearts warmed by the sight of their children feeling important, seen, and worthy. Amid the crowd, a young boy around 8 years old tugged at Miss Grace's sleeve, looking up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Miss Grace," he said shyly, "is Mr. Darnell really a hero?" His innocent question, spoken with such sincerity, brought a soft smile to her face. She knelt down to his level, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "He is," she replied, her voice warm and kind, "but not because of what he bought. Darnell is a hero because he sees the good in everyone here. He knows how special you all are." The boy nodded, his face lighting up with a smile that seemed to reflect the happiness of everyone around him. He held his own small gift close, a scarf he'd proudly chosen, feeling the warmth of Darnell's generosity in every fiber. By the time the last item was handed out, the atmosphere had taken on a celebratory quality. People stayed, chatting and laughing, trying on their new items, and admiring one another's choices. It was a scene of pure joy and community, a moment where everyone felt connected, bound by the kindness that had been extended to them. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Miss Grace stood back for a moment, taking in the sight before her. This was more than just a gift from Darnell. It was a reminder of the strength and beauty in their community, a testament to the impact that one person's generosity could have on so many lives. The joy in the crowd was contagious, spreading like a warm, quiet wave through every person there, filling them with a rare and precious sense of pride. And somewhere, she knew, Darnell was carrying on with his day, content in the knowledge that his gift had brought something priceless to the people he cared about. The gesture was his way of reminding them all that they mattered, that their worth was beyond any price tag, and that sometimes, even in a world of quick judgments and assumptions, kindness and generosity could create moments of true beauty and connection. As the crowd around the community center began to disperse, people left with their new items, chatting excitedly and carrying their gifts as if they were treasures. The street outside had transformed. It felt lighter, warmer, even as the day grew late. Neighbors who had merely nodded in passing were now sharing smiles, stopping to admire each other's new possessions, feeling like something special had swept through their part of town. Even those who hadn't received an item felt touched by the moment, drawn into the joy and pride that Darnell's gesture had spread. Miss Grace stood by the door of the community center, watching as families and friends walked away, holding their heads a little higher, their spirits visibly lifted. She noticed a few parents carefully folding their new scarves or tucking wallets into their bags, treating each piece with a reverence that came from knowing the rarity of such a gift. There was a certain pride in their movements, a quiet but undeniable sense of worth that came not just from the luxury of the items, but from the knowledge that someone had thought of them, seen them, and chosen to honor them in this way. As the last few people left, Miss Grace found herself standing alone for a moment, reflecting on everything that had unfolded. She felt a profound gratitude toward Darnell, who, in his quiet way, had reminded everyone of their value. She thought about how, for many of these families, a gift like this would be remembered for years. A small but powerful reminder that they were worthy of dignity and beauty, just like anyone else. The simple act of kindness had created a memory, a moment that would ripple through their lives long after the items had worn with time. Inside the center, she began tidying up with a few volunteers who lingered to help. They worked in comfortable silence, still wrapped in the warmth of the day's events. One of the volunteers, a young woman named Amelia, looked up as she arranged some chairs and said softly, "It's incredible what he did, Miss Grace. I didn't think. I've never seen anything like it." Miss Grace smiled, nodding as she looked around the room, which seemed brighter somehow, infused with the kindness Darnell had shared. "It's a rare thing," she agreed, her voice gentle. "But that's Darnell. He sees the good in people and wants them to see it in themselves." She glanced out the window, her thoughts drifting to the young man who had given so much of himself without expecting anything in return. Meanwhile, Darnell walked through the quiet streets of his neighborhood, his steps unhurried, his mind content as he reflected on the day. He hadn't returned to the community center to see the reactions or the distribution. He knew Miss Grace would handle everything with care and respect, just as she always did. The joy of giving, for him, wasn't in witnessing the reactions, but in knowing the impact it would have on people's lives. Each item had been chosen with the hope that it would bring pride and dignity to its recipient, a small token of appreciation for their resilience and strength. As he walked, he passed by familiar places. The local market, the park where kids played soccer, the old corner store where he had spent countless afternoons as a boy. The world around him seemed unchanged, yet he knew that his actions today had created a shift, a ripple of kindness that would echo long after this moment. He felt at peace, knowing that he had given back to the people who had shaped him, to the community that had supported him. But his peace was briefly interrupted when he noticed a figure leaning against a lamppost just up ahead. It was the man from the boutique, the one in the designer suit who had sneered and whispered with his companion. Darnell hadn't expected to see him here in his neighborhood, but as he drew closer, he realized the man had been waiting, his expression different now, the arrogance gone, replaced by something unreadable, perhaps curiosity, perhaps something else entirely. "Darnell, right?" the man asked, his tone uncertain. Darnell stopped, nodding slowly, wondering what had brought this stranger here. The man shifted, glancing around the neighborhood as if seeing it for the first time, a hint of discomfort in his posture. "I wanted to see if it was true what you did back there. I just couldn't believe it that someone would give all that away." Darnell watched him, sensing the man's struggle to reconcile what he had witnessed with his own assumptions and biases. He could tell the man was trying to understand, trying to fit this act of generosity into a worldview that perhaps didn't often see kindness as something given freely without expectation. After a moment, Darnell shrugged, his voice calm and even. "Sometimes people just need to feel seen, to know they're worth something." The man looked away, the weight of Darnell's words sinking in. Now, there was a flicker of something close to guilt in his eyes, a hint that he understood his earlier judgment had been misplaced. "I guess I never thought of it like that," he admitted quietly, his gaze dropping to the ground. Most people would have just walked out angry, maybe even caused a scene after the way they were treated. But you did something different." Darnell offered him a small smile, a gentle forgiveness in his expression. "Sometimes it's not about proving a point," he replied. "It's about showing others that they can rise above what's expected of them, that they're better than the assumptions people make." The man nodded slowly, clearly moved by the simplicity and wisdom of Darnell's words. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as if re-evaluating his own values and judgments. Finally, he extended his hand, his expression one of newfound respect. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't think I'll ever forget what you did today. You changed something for a lot of people, maybe even for me." Darnell shook his hand, the moment filled with a quiet understanding. No further words were needed. The man walked away, his steps slower, his shoulders less rigid, as though a burden had been lifted. Darnell watched him disappear into the distance, a small smile lingering on his face. It wasn't every day that a simple act of kindness had the power to change someone's perspective, but Darnell knew that this was just the beginning. His gesture had sown a seed, and he hoped it would grow, inspiring others to look beyond judgment and assumptions, to act with empathy and kindness. As he continued down the street, Darnell felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he didn't need recognition or praise for what he'd done. The true reward was in knowing he had shared a part of himself with those who mattered, planting a seed of goodness that might flourish in ways he couldn't yet see. His steps echoed softly in the quiet evening, each one a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts held the most power, touching lives in ways words could never express. The evening settled quietly over the community, the soft glow of streetlights casting warm pools of light on the pavement. By now, most people had returned home, but the buzz of the day's events lingered, carried into homes, spreading through conversations over dinner tables, and lingering in the minds of everyone who had witnessed Darnell's unexpected act of generosity. In living rooms, parents carefully hung up scarves and jackets in places of honor, or tucked wallets and accessories away as prized possessions. The items were cherished not just for their luxury, but for what they symbolized, a gesture of dignity and a reminder of their worth. At one modest apartment, a teenage girl named Clara sat cross-legged on her bed, cradling a beautiful leather handbag that had been among the gifts. She traced her fingers over the smooth leather, admiring the quality and elegance of something she had only ever seen in magazines. The bag felt both surreal and precious to her, an item from a world she hadn't thought she'd ever be part of. Her mother peeked into her room, watching her daughter with a soft smile, touched by the way Clara was caring for her new possession. Clara looked up, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, do you think I can use this for graduation?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. "I've never had anything like this before. It feels special." Her mother stepped into the room, sitting beside her and placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Of course, honey," she replied warmly. "You deserve it. This bag is special because it was given with love, with the belief that you're worth it. You should carry it with pride." The girl smiled, hugging the bag to her chest. For her, Darnell's gift had become more than just an item. It was a token of respect and a reminder of her potential. She knew that when she walked across that stage on graduation day, she would feel a little more confident, a little more seen. The bag was her quiet armor, a reminder of the pride her community had in her, and a symbol of the belief that she could reach beyond what was expected of her. In another part of town, a young mother named Lila held a silk scarf Darnell had gifted, its delicate fabric a stark contrast to the worn, practical clothes she usually wore. She draped it around her shoulders, glancing at herself in the mirror with a shy smile. Her young son watched her, his eyes wide with admiration, seeing his mother transformed by a simple but beautiful accessory. Lila had spent years making ends meet, always putting her family's needs before her own. This scarf was her first luxury, a rare item that spoke to her of possibility and elegance she had rarely allowed herself to imagine. "Mommy, you look like a princess," her son said, his small voice filled with awe. Lila laughed softly, pulling her son into a hug, the scarf settling over both of them like a soft embrace. "Maybe just for today," she whispered, feeling a warmth she hadn't known in a long time. "And maybe you're my little prince." They shared a quiet moment, the scarf becoming a part of their story, a tangible reminder that kindness and dignity could be woven into even the smallest parts of life. In each home, Darnell's gifts had found new meaning. They had become more than just items of luxury. They had become symbols of hope, pride, and connection. And as each person held on to their gift, they held on to a piece of Darnell's belief in them. A reminder that their lives, their struggles, and their stories mattered. As night deepened, the community center grew quiet, the day's excitement settling into a peaceful calm. Miss Grace remained in her office, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded. She was reviewing the day, feeling the lingering energy of joy and gratitude that filled the air outside her window. The street was still, but in her mind she could see the faces of the people who had left the center earlier, their expressions transformed by Darnell's kindness. She could still hear the laughter, see the tears of joy, and feel the strength of a community brought together by a single act. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts, and when she looked up, She was surprised to see Darnell standing in the doorway. He was dressed simply, his posture relaxed, but there was a gentle glow of contentment in his eyes. Miss Grace smiled, gesturing for him to come in, her heart lifting at the sight of him. She had been wanting to share her gratitude with him, to let him know just how deeply his actions had touched everyone. "Darnell," she greeted warmly, standing up to shake his hand, though her expression held much more than just formality. It was filled with admiration and pride. "I wasn't sure if I'd get to see you today. What you did was remarkable. You have no idea how much it meant to everyone." Darnell smiled, a modest look in his eyes. He took a seat across from her, running a hand through his hair as he glanced around the familiar office. "I just wanted to do something that reminded people how much they matter," he replied quietly. "Sometimes the world makes you feel small, like you're invisible. I just wanted to remind them, and myself, that we're not invisible, that we're worth more than what people see." Miss Grace nodded, deeply moved by his words. She knew what he meant. The quiet but constant weight of being underestimated, overlooked. It was something that many in their community had felt often in silence. But Darnell's actions had brought that struggle into the open, offering hope and validation to those who needed it most. "You did that, Darnell," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "People went home today not just with gifts, but with a sense of pride, a sense of being seen and respected. You reminded them that they have value, that they belong." They sat together in comfortable silence, each reflecting on the day. For Darnell, the conversation was a grounding reminder of why he had done this, a reinforcement of the purpose he had carried into that boutique earlier. He hadn't gone in to prove anything to the people who doubted him. He had gone in with a mission, a personal drive to make an impact. Hearing Miss Grace's words confirmed that he had achieved that in ways he hadn't fully imagined. As they spoke, Miss Grace reached across her desk and handed him a small envelope. Darnell looked at it, puzzled. "What's this?" he asked, glancing up at her with a hint of curiosity. She smiled knowingly. "It's a collection of letters," she explained. "After you left, a few people felt compelled to write down what today meant to them. I think they wanted you to know, in their own words, how much you touched their lives." Darnell's eyes softened as he took the envelope, holding it carefully, as though it were as precious as the gifts he had given. The thought that people had taken the time to put their gratitude into words moved him deeply, reminding him of the ripple effect his actions had set in motion. He tucked the envelope into his jacket, feeling the warmth of it against his heart as he stood to leave. Miss Grace rose with him, her eyes filled with pride. She extended her hand, but he pulled her into a hug instead, grateful for her role in supporting his vision. "Thank you, Miss Grace," he murmured, "for helping me make today possible." As they parted, he walked out of her office, the envelope close to his chest, carrying with him the words of gratitude and respect that would stay with him for a long time. Tiska. His actions had come full circle, touching not only the lives of those in his community, but also reaffirming his own purpose. A purpose rooted in kindness, generosity, and the quiet strength of lifting others. Stepping out into the night, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace, knowing that his actions had made a difference, a lasting impression that would continue to echo in the lives of those he had reached. The city streets were quiet as Darnell walked through the familiar neighborhood, his steps slow, the envelope tucked safely inside his jacket. The night air was cool and refreshing, and he could feel the energy of the day still coursing through him like a quiet hum under his skins. His mind wandered to the letters in his pocket, the words of gratitude and kindness he hadn't yet read but could already feel. Each step he took echoed with the memories of the day, filling him with a deep satisfaction he could barely put into words. He passed by the corner store where he used to stop as a kid, the one where the owner, Mr. Gomez, had always looked out for him, sneaking him an extra piece of candy when he'd scrounged up enough coins to buy a soda. The lights were still on inside, and Darnell could see Mr. Gomez behind the counter, going through his nightly routine of counting change and preparing for closing. A sudden impulse made him push open the door, the familiar sound of the old bell jingling as he entered. Mr. Gomez looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile when he saw Darnell. "Hey, look who's here! Long time no see, Darnell," he greeted, his voice filled with genuine happiness. The older man stepped around the counter, pulling him into a quick embrace. "I heard about what you did today," he added, stepping back and patting Darnell on the shoulder with pride. "Everyone's talking about it. You've done something amazing for this neighborhood." Darnell smiled, feeling a bit shy under the praise. But there was a pride in Mr. Gomez's words that warmed him. "I just wanted to remind people of what they mean to this place, you know," he replied, his voice soft. "People here work hard, and they deserve to know they're seen. Sometimes all it takes is a little something to make them feel appreciated." Mr. Gomez nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "You're a good man, Darnell. People don't forget kindness like that. You've given them something more valuable than anything money can buy." He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "And maybe you've shown a few people in that fancy store what true wealth really looks like." Darnell chuckled, realizing the truth in Mr. Gomez's words. He had walked into that boutique with purpose, but it was true. The real wealth he had shared wasn't in the items themselves, but in the intention and respect behind them. He and Mr. Gomez exchanged a few more words, reminiscing about old times, and Darnell left the store feeling an even deeper sense of connection to his roots, to the people who had been there for him from the beginning. As he continued his walk, he found himself growing more and more curious about the letters. They had become something of a mystery to him, holding the thoughts and gratitude of those he had touched in ways he hadn't yet fully understood. Unable to wait any longer, he found a quiet bench in a nearby park, took a seat under a street lamp, and pulled out the envelope. He carefully opened it, his fingers brushing against the folded papers inside, and began to read. The first letter was written in careful handwriting, the ink slightly smudged in places, as if the writer had paused often, perhaps unsure of how to express their feelings. It was from Clara, the teenage girl who had taken home the leather handbag. Her words were humble yet powerful, filled with a sense of wonder and joy that brought a smile to Darnell's face. "Dear Mr. Darnell," it began, "I've never owned anything as beautiful as this bag. When I look at it, I feel like I'm someone important, someone worth noticing. It's not just a bag to me. It's a reminder that I can achieve things I've always dreamed about. I'll be taking this with me to graduation, and every time I hold it, I'll remember today and the kindness you showed us. Thank you for believing in us, for reminding us that we're worth something." Darnell felt his chest tighten with emotion as he finished reading Clara's words. They captured exactly what he had hoped to offer, a sense of pride and worth that would carry her through moments of doubt, reminding her of her potential for whist time. He folded the letter carefully, setting it aside as he moved to the next one, his heart full. The second letter was from Lila, the young mother he'd noticed at the community center. Her note was brief but filled with gratitude, each word carefully chosen. "You may not know me," she wrote, "but your gift has given me something I never thought I'd have. A moment to feel beautiful. To feel like I'm more than just a mother trying to make ends meet. My son looked at me today with pride in his eyes, and that moment will stay with me forever. Thank you for reminding me that I deserve good things too." Darnell swallowed, feeling a surge of empathy and understanding for the weight Lila must carry every day. He could picture her holding her son close, the silk scarf draped around her shoulders. A simple but profound reminder of her worth. It was a small thing, perhaps, but for her, it was transformative. A reminder that she, too, was deserving of grace and kindness. He continued reading through each letter, each one offering a glimpse into the lives of those he had touched. Some were written by parents expressing their joy in seeing their children's excitement, others by elderly community members who thanked him for the reminder that they were not forgotten. Each letter added a layer of depth to the day's events, revealing to Darnell the many ways his actions had impacted people in ways he hadn't anticipated. By the time he reached the last letter, his heart felt both heavy and full, a complex blend of joy, gratitude, and humility. This final letter was from Miss Grace, and her words were a reflection of her role as the heart of the community center, someone who had seen firsthand the struggles and triumphs of everyone in their neighborhood. "Darnell," she wrote, "what you did today reminded everyone of their own strength, their own worth. You gave people a gift far greater than the items themselves. You gave them dignity, pride, and hope. I am proud of you, not just for what you did today, but for the man you've become. You are a light to this community, a reminder that kindness can change lives in ways we may never fully understand. Thank you, Darnell, for reminding us all that we matter." Darnell closed the letter, a profound sense of peace settling over him. Miss Grace's words were like an anchor, grounding him in the purpose he had carried with him all his life. He knew that no matter where he went or what he achieved, this community, These people would always be his foundation, his reason to keep moving forward with compassion and humility. As he sat there, the letters carefully folded back into the envelope, he felt a quiet resolve to continue his mission of kindness. This moment, this day, would be a memory he carried, a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts could have the most powerful impact. Standing up, he tucked the envelope back into his jacket and made his way home, his heart light, knowing that he had made a difference, one that would echo in his life and the lives of those around him for years to come. Darnell walked back through the quiet streets, the city lights casting a soft glow on the pavement as he neared his apartment. The letters weighed comfortingly in his jacket pocket, each word lingering in his mind, reminding him of the importance of what he'd done. He thought back to the boutique, to the skepticism he'd faced from the staff and customers, and how easily they had dismissed him based on their assumptions. Yet in choosing not to react with anger, he had shown them something far more powerful, a quiet strength rooted in dignity and respect for himself and others. As he unlocked his apartment door, the familiar scent of home greeted him, and he felt a sense of calm settle over him. He placed the envelope on his kitchen table, knowing he would revisit it many times in the days to come. It was a memento, a testament to the lives he had touched and the connections he had deepened in a single, unforgettable day. He poured himself a cup of tea, savoring the warmth as he looked out the window at the city, the lights twinkling like stars against the night sky. His phone buzzed, breaking the peaceful silence, and he glanced down to see a message from Miss Grace. It was a simple thank you, but it was accompanied by a photo, a snapshot of the community center earlier that day, filled with smiles, laughter, and people proudly wearing their new items. Children posed with scarves draped around their shoulders, parents showed off wallets and jackets, and elderly members of the community held their gifts close, their faces glowing with pride. Darnell's heart swelled as he took in each face, each joyful expression captured in that single moment. He typed a quick reply to Miss Grace, expressing his gratitude and asking her to thank everyone for him. After sending the message, he put his phone down and leaned back, reflecting on what he had just seen. The photo was a reminder that his actions had reached beyond the walls of the boutique or the boundaries of his neighborhood. He had given people something intangible, something that could not be measured by the luxury of the items, but by the respect and love behind them. His thoughts drifted to the people in the boutique. The clerk who had initially looked down on him, the manager who had doubted his intentions, and even the man in the designer suit who had come to find him, humbled by the encounter. Each of them had witnessed something that had challenged their assumptions, something that perhaps would change the way they viewed others in the future. He hoped that his actions had left a small but meaningful impact on them, a reminder that kindness and dignity could flourish even in unexpected places. Finishing his tea, Darnell felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. He knew he didn't need recognition or applause. The gratitude he'd received, the smiles he'd seen, and the letters he'd read were enough. They were reminders that his choice to rise above prejudice and act with generosity had resonated, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this single day. He had given people a piece of himself, a gift that would live on in their memories and stories, a reminder that they mattered and were worthy of respect. As he stood to turn off the lights, he glanced once more at the envelope on the table, feeling a quiet pride in his actions. Today had been a milestone, not just for him but for everyone whose life he had touched. He knew that in the days to come, he would continue to find ways to give back, to lift others up, and to inspire the same kindness he had received from his own community over the years. In the silence of his apartment, with the city lights casting a gentle glow through the window, Darnell felt a renewed sense of purpose. His actions had spoken louder than any words could, showing that true worth lay not in wealth or possessions, but in the impact one left on others. And as he drifted off to sleep that night, he carried with him the peace of knowing that in his own quiet way, he had made a difference, one that would echo far beyond this single, unforgettable day. The next morning, Darnell awoke to sunlight streaming through his window, the soft warmth nudging him awake. There was a tranquility in the air, the kind that followed a day well spent. He lay there for a moment, reflecting on the previous day, the faces he had seen, and the letters that had captured the gratitude of his community. The memory brought a quiet smile to his face, but as he got up and began his morning routine, he noticed something different. His phone was buzzing repeatedly with notifications, more than he'd ever seen. Curious, he picked it up and found his message inbox flooded. There were texts from friends, calls from family, and messages from people he didn't even know, all reaching out to him with words of appreciation, admiration, and even disbelief. As he scrolled through, he saw that a few of his friends had tagged him in posts on social media. Clicking on one of the links, he was taken to a post by the boutique's manager, who had shared the story of Darnell's visit in heartfelt words. The manager had written about his initial assumptions and the humbling experience of watching Darnell buy out the entire line of luxury items, not for himself but for his community. He admitted how he'd misjudged Darnell, and how, in a single afternoon, his perspective had shifted. Yesterday I learned that kindness, humility, and respect can change lives in ways we can't always predict, the post read. Darnell didn't just buy items. He showed us all what true wealth looks like. His generosity reminded me and my staff to look beyond appearances, to see the strength and dignity in others that we so often overlook. The post had gone viral, with thousands of people commenting, sharing, and expressing their admiration for what Darnell had done. Many people shared their own stories of feeling invisible, dismissed, or overlooked, and how his actions had inspired them to treat others with more kindness and empathy. Reading through the comments, Darnell felt a mix of surprise and humility. He hadn't expected his gesture to reach so far beyond his community, to resonate with people he'd never met. But here it was, a ripple effect spreading across cities, even countries, as people connected with the universal message of dignity and respect he had tried to convey. Amid the messages, Darnell noticed a few that stood out. One was from a woman in another state who wrote about how her son, a young black man, had often faced similar judgments in stores and public spaces. "Seeing what you did yesterday, Darnell," she wrote, "gave me hope. It reminded me that there are people like you who are breaking down those walls, changing perceptions, one act of kindness at a time. Thank you for giving him and so many others something to believe in." Another message was from a young man who admitted he had been one of the customers in the boutique that day, someone who had dismissed Darnell when he first walked in. His message was honest, almost raw, as he confessed the guilt he felt for his judgment and the inspiration he'd found in Darnell's actions. "I didn't understand at first why you did what you did," he wrote, "but seeing you walk out of that store with grace, knowing now that it was all for your community, made me see things differently. You've taught me a lesson I'll carry with me, and I hope one day I'll be able to show the same kind of grace you did." Darnell took a deep breath, feeling the weight of these words settle over him. The impact of his actions was unfolding in ways he hadn't anticipated. He'd thought of his gift as a simple gesture for his community, but it had become something larger, reaching people across the country, and even sparking introspection among those who had witnessed it. The thought filled him with a profound sense of responsibility. A responsibility to continue leading by example, to carry forward this message of empathy, understanding, and dignity. Just as he was absorbing all of this, his phone rang. It was Miss Grace. Her voice on the other end was brimming with excitement. "Darnell, have you seen what's happening? You're everywhere. People are talking about you, about what you did for our community. It's inspiring." Darnell chuckled, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "I didn't expect any of this, Miss Grace. I just wanted to give back, to remind people that they're seen and valued. I didn't think it would become something so big." "That's because your kindness was pure," Miss Grace replied, her tone gentle. "You didn't do it for attention. You did it out of love, and that's why people are connecting with it. They see the sincerity in your actions, and it's giving them hope. It's showing them that there is still goodness in the world." They talked for a few more minutes, sharing in the amazement of the unexpected response before hanging up. Miss Grace mentioned something that stayed with him. "Darnell," she said, "this community has always been proud of you, but now the world is seeing what we've known all along. You're a light. Keep shining." After their call, Darnell sat in thoughtful silence, looking out his window at the city. He felt the enormity of what Miss Grace had said sink in, her words stirring something deeper within him. He hadn't intended to change lives beyond his community. Yet somehow, by staying true to his values and treating others with respect, he had reached a far greater audience. The thought was both humbling and empowering. That morning, as he prepared to step out into the world again, he made a quiet promise to himself that he would continue to carry this message forward, not just through grand gestures, but in the everyday choices he made, in the way he treated people, And in the example he set, he would continue to show that kindness, empathy, and dignity were not luxuries but necessities, and that every person, no matter their background, appearance, or circumstances, deserved to be seen and respected. The world had seen his light, but Darnell knew that his journey was only beginning. He was ready to walk forward, to carry the ripple he had started, and to inspire others to look beyond the surface, to recognize the shared humanity in each of us, and to treat every person with the respect they deserved. In the weeks that followed, Darnell's life changed in ways he could never have predicted. The story of his generosity continued to spread, finding its way into news outlets, community organizations, and social media platforms. People reached out to him from across the country, expressing how his actions had inspired them to view others with more compassion, to look past initial assumptions, and to treat each person with the respect and dignity they deserved. It was a story that resonated because it reminded people of something fundamental, that kindness and empathy still had the power to bridge divides and challenge prejudice. As the story grew, Darnell received invitations to speak at events, to share his perspective and insights on what had motivated him that day in the boutique. At first, he was hesitant, unsure if his quiet act of kindness warranted such attention. But as he thought back to the letters he'd read, to the impact his gesture had on the people in his community, he realized this was an opportunity to extend that message even further. He could take the values he held so deeply and share them, encouraging others to act with intention and kindness in their own lives. One evening, he stood before a small crowd at a local community center, much like the one where he delivered the gifts. Friends, family, and community members filled the seats, along with others who had been moved by his story and had traveled just to hear him speak. As he looked out at the audience, he saw a few familiar faces: the boutique manager, the young man in the designer suit who had approached him that night, Miss Grace, and even Mr. Gomez from the corner store. Each person held a unique part of his journey, a piece of the day that had started a ripple effect far beyond what he'd imagined. Darnell took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, and began to speak from his heart. "I didn't set out to change anything beyond my neighborhood," he started, his voice steady but humble. "All I wanted was to remind people that they matter, that they're worth more than what the world sometimes tells them. I know what it feels like to be overlooked, to be judged before someone even knows your name. And I know how powerful it is to be seen, truly seen, for who you are. That's what I hope to give back." The room was silent, each person hanging on to his words as he spoke with quiet sincerity. "What I learned," he continued, "is that kindness has a reach far beyond what we can see. When we choose to lift each other up, to look past appearances, to honor the dignity in every person, we create a ripple that extends into the lives of people we may never meet." He paused, letting the message sink in. Each of us has the power to make others feel valued. You don't need money or recognition to make a difference. Sometimes it's in the way you listen to someone, the way you offer a smile, or the way you stand beside them when the world tries to make them feel small. Those small actions add up. They change lives. As he spoke, Darnell could see the audience responding, nodding, absorbing his message with an understanding that went beyond words. He finished by sharing a thought that had guided him throughout his journey. True worth isn't in what we own or what others think of us. It's in the way we treat people, in the love and respect we share. That's something no one can ever take away. When he stepped down from the podium, the audience erupted into applause, not just for his words, but for the kindness and courage he had shown. Friends and strangers alike approached him, each sharing their own stories of how his actions had impacted them. A young woman tearfully thanked him for helping her find strength to be herself in a world that often judged her harshly. An elderly couple expressed their admiration for his humility and generosity, saying they'd found hope in his story during a time when they'd felt discouraged by the world around them. By the end of the evening, Darnell realized that his life's purpose had deepened, but had started as a single act of kindness, had grown into a mission, one he felt called to carry forward. His actions had shown him that every moment, no matter how small, had the potential to bring about change, and he knew that he would continue walking this path, lighting the way with empathy, humility, and the unwavering belief that every person deserved to be seen, valued, and respected. As he left the community center, stepping out into the night, he felt a profound sense of peace. The stars glittered above, and he looked up, feeling connected to something larger than himself, something timeless and beautiful. His story would live on, in the lives of those he touched. In the small moments of kindness they would go on to share, creating new ripples that would carry his message into places he'd never dreamed of reaching. Darnell walked home that night, a quiet smile on his face, knowing that he'd made a difference, and that in a world where everyone longs to be seen and valued, sometimes that is all the wealth anyone truly needs.